All right, we're back. It is COMP2007. That's Enterprise Computing in the summer 2016 semester at Georgian. And we are week 11, part 1. And what we're going to be doing today is talking about security, but I also want to talk about your final project. So this is what I'm going to start with right now. Final team project. It's the first part is due Friday, August the 5th. That's next week on Friday at midnight. For your final project, I'm just going to go down here. I'm working on it still. Working in a group of up to 4 members or on your own and utilizing your accumulated knowledge of ASP.NET. I have to say ASP.NET MVC because someone and for assignment 1 has had it in PHP. I love it. I don't know what they're thinking, right? That's a 0. Anyway, so I have to mention ASP.NET MVC, which is Microsoft. And you're going to create a mock e-commerce web application, like we talked about before. The web application will mostly feature a catalog of items you'll be selling that share a common theme, right? You may use the fantasy restaurant idea from assignment 2 if you want to combine with other people as a starting point. I see what I do. I don't type properly when I'm typing. As a starting point for this project. You'll be required to create additional pages to support the application, such as a contact page and an about page and other pages used for product management. And what I mean by that is, you may have to make these pages in order for you to add products to the database and so on. Some people have decided to for assignment 2 to use that sample data method of adding products. You can certainly do that. You can also do things directly, and I'll talk about how you can do things directly with the database instead of adding a sample data. A little bit of data entry there, but the great thing is it's going to be formatted properly, and you can test that out. Let's talk about, where is it? Oh, here we are. Wow, that's a big space. We're going to get rid of that space for sure. So from a project instructions perspective, this is wrong. So I can already tell you this is wrong. It's 29 points, and the spread is a little bit different here because I'm working on the spread. So it's like 29 points for UI, 29 points for functionality, 10 marks for site structure still, 5 marks for internal documentation, 6 marks for external documentation, 4 marks for version control, and 4 marks for cloud hosting, right? So what's required for next week, because a lot of stuff to be done, is this piece. Project part 1 is your project concept, your landing page, and site security, the basic stuff. So far, I've got 26 marks. I'm going to adjust the marking scheme so that they're all even. I need to find another 3 marks there just to balance it off. So there's 29 marks per section, because right now I'm counting 87 total points that I'm going to be using for the whole project. So if you think about it, the higher the number of points, the more the number of hours, right? I kind of have a relation. I'm going to kind of put it together. I think every 10 points, I think is like 2 hours or something crazy like that, at least, for actual time per person, right? That's a per person thing, right? So I don't know exactly how it maps out for if you're working solo, right? If you're working solo, I think you have to multiply that by 3, right? I'm being honest, right? There's like, part of it is because of the testing involved. It's not because I want you to multiply your work by 3, right? But because there's so much testing involved when you're working on your own. All right, so your external document, and that includes the following: company logo, table of contents, detailed app description, and wireframes, all due next week. Wireframes means let's get the basic wireframes done, especially for your main landing page, as well as your shop page, your catalog page. You need to have that put together, depending on what you're going to sell. Some of the details pages should have them as well. But hey, you know what, guys? You don't have to give it to me for my contact. Don't give me my contact page. Don't give me the about page. And then there's some other pages, for example, my login and registration pages. I don't need wireframes for those. Those are things that are auto-generated by the system for the most part. You don't need to give me those. But definitely for your main feature for the pages, like the catalog, the checkout pages, all those kind of extra things that are specific for this particular assignment, those are the ones I want you to focus on. So at least you get those basic ones done. Those are all due next week on Friday. Home controller related views should all be scaffolded, right? So your landing page should be scaffolded, but you should actually style it. So I want you to, add some style to it and some functionality so that it shows what kind of products you're selling. mock it up if you have to. It doesn't have to be live and functional, just mocked up. Your about page and contact page, again, like I said, you don't have to create wireframes for them, but they're done, right? They're basically done just to fill them out. So just put some information about your about page and your contact page. The about page should feature a little bit about you and your team, eh? Like, here's a little bit about us. Who's working on this thing? So it's you and the people that are working with you. That would be a good thing for you guys to put together, right? So if you're working with a team of 2, let's say you decide, I don't want to get more than 2 people. People ask me this today. Tom, can I only have 2 people? Yes, you can. Tom, can I work solo? Yes, you can. I don't recommend you work solo on this one, but if you really want to, do what you have to do, right? Some people have weird schedules, like I said, and that's why I allowed people to use their assignment 2 as a jump-off point, so they can continue with this whole restaurant idea, right? If they really want to help them to finish off their final project. Can I work with a team of 3 or 4? Yes, you can. But remember that I want each of the team members who are working together to do something. So assign jobs, and typically what you want to do is assign one person to do the external documentation, the wireframing, all that kind of stuff. Maybe a little bit of styling as well, because they're working with wireframes. They can work on the style, the CSS part. What is it going to look like? Pick the colors, all that kind of stuff for your external documentation. And then there's going to be a person that's going to be working with, the actual, maybe 2 people can work like in pairs, like pair programming to do the model and the controller piece. And maybe the other person can work on things like database design and how that's going to work out, right? Because database design itself it's almost a job in itself, if you think about it, how to put the database together, how the tables relate to each other, and how that all the relations map to each other. And I think that's really important to come up with an ERD for your database. So all those kind of things can work together to kind of create a 3 or 4 person team. Some of those jobs can be, kind of piggybacked on top of the other. Like, for example, one of the pairs, the partners can be working more on models and controller. The other person helps with model and controller, but also takes care of the database design. So it depends on how you want to break it out. So do you have to work with 4 people? No. Do I recommend more than 2 people? Yes, but 2 people can do it pretty comfortably if you work diligently together. 1 person I do not recommend, unless if you can get away from working on your own for this one, that would be good, right? Only because there's just so much to do, and in the space of 3 weeks. So I guess initial GitHub repo created and cloud provider setup, that's 6 points. Initial site security setup and views cleaned up. We're going to talk about what that means. That means that I don't want you just to accept the scaffold for the views and leave them as is, right? That's not acceptable. We're going to talk about which views you should remove, right? Even for your assignment 2, you should do that. Take out the views you don't need, right, from the scaffold. If you're not using security for your assignment 2, don't include security. Take out those views, man. I don't want to see them for your assignment 2 if they're there. Site structure. It's got to be responsive, so that means you're going to use Bootstrap or something else. If you don't want to use Bootstrap, and people commented about this before, Tom, I'm working so much on Bootstrap, do I have to use it? No, you don't. If you want to use Foundation, or if you want to use your own CSS media queries or whatever to take care of responsive design manually, go ahead. You don't have to, but it's got to be responsive, and I think Bootstrap just makes it a lot quicker and easier. This is not a CSS course. Your site style should be decided upon. So the first part is the colors and style, and your look and feel of the site should be already established by next week. And your assets folder should be set up, and any kind of assets, images, and so on should be inside there. So all the stuff that you're going to add for your site, as much as you can include as well. Anyway, for now, internal documentation, that means comment headers, and I said it on each page. But that means really, what I wanted is for each controller, for sure. I mean, 1 comment for each controller. For each HTML page, I know it's in the documentation that I'm asking for each HTML page. Might be a little much, but at least for each of your controllers, somewhere where I can see who's been working on your stuff. That's important for your comment headers. And also definitely for your CSS, if you have a custom CSS page you're working on, it's got to be in there. Any work that you've done, you should kind of take a stamp of your comments and just stamp it from one page to the other. I want to see them, so that way I can see these are your pages, right? That's all due next week on Friday. So it's not a lot. It looks like a lot of little things, but it's just, you can do a lot of this stuff through the scaffold. This would be more of an easy one, and this is due August 5th. Like I'm gonna scaffold this out in terms of weight and everything else a little bit more, and what's due. But part 2, which I'm going to be talking about next week, is due. That's Friday, August the 12th, right? So that's going to be the week after. it's most of your functionality at this point. Okay, so that means that all your models, controllers, and views are set up properly. By that point, you have your basic site set up, and if you're working from assignment 2, you got a lot of this already, right? So it's not a lot. I'm trying to minimize the workload. That's what I'm trying to do for you guys. So that way, it's not a lot to do. You just have to add in, and this is the major thing. And I got to put it in here so you guys can see it. You need for sure by this point your shopping cart has to be here. Shopping cart is set up for sure at this point, as well as your checkout page. So checkout page has to be there, and other pages associated with these pages, right? Like for example, your whole shopping catalog, right? Your product catalog. That's got to be completed, as an example, by part 2, right? So that means things are mostly working. You've got your main functionality, your database structure is completed, all that stuff is working, right? But there's still a few things you need to take care of. Some testing you need to do, additional documentation, and all that kind of stuff is going to be done by the 3rd part, right? And that means any additional views you want to create for management, like you want to manage your products or whatever, that you want to use for yourself, finishing touches for style. I'm going to comment on their style every week when we talk about. We're going to sit down together again, just like we've done in the past, and I'm going to mark you, physically in the class. So I want you and your partners, hopefully you're all in the same section, to sit together, and then we'll talk about what you're producing next week, and then again every single week until you're done. So I'll give you feedback as we go, and then I want to try and give you your marks right there if you're done. Now, if you're not done, and if you need another day or so, that's okay, but I'll give you a preliminary idea of what your stuff is going to be ready, what stuff is going to be worth, and then I'll go around and remark or adjust later on. So by the final week, that's week 3, that's the final week, that's August, the last day of classes in this semester, Friday, August 19th, is where I've slated for this thing to be due. There is a bit of a challenge with this in that on the last day, I won't be able to review your final finished product because we're going to be doing something that day. And I've kind of put it up there and said, there's a bit of a Slack thing going on where I said, look, you know what, there's a bit of a, an option for one of the 2 things. One of them is presentation. You can choose to have a presentation with 7 slides, 10 minutes a piece for a total of 10%. It's going to be worth about 10% of your final grade, right? So it's going to work. Or we can do a practical exam, right? 90 to 120 minutes where you build something. It's worth 10%. Now, the presentation would mean that every partner is going to talk about their part, what they're doing. The challenge with the presentation piece right now, and that's why I can see that there's less now by this time. What is it? Number 1 is the major winner right now, right? 1 is presentations, right? 2 is practical exam, yeah? So when you see this is a problem, and I'm going to talk about the problem for a second. I like the presentation idea. We can do presentations. Not a lot of people are in our class. We can probably knock off our presentation. You guys, especially this class, you'll be out of here like in a couple hours max, and you're out of here, right? And it's not a lot of stress. You come up, you present yourselves as a team, you talk about your product, I want to see your product, and then we go over it. That's no problem. I like that. And we can give you some feedback and all that kind of stuff. I'll mark you right away, and then see you later. Have a great, a next semester or whatever, and good luck to you. The problem with that is, what if you're not done? And this is the thing. I mean, I have to say this is what happens every time when I do presentations. There's just someone that's going to go up and say, well, my partner's trounced me, and now this is the piece of crap that I have to show you, Tom. And it's a waste of time for me, you, everybody, right? I'm sorry to say it that way, but sometimes it is that way. And so they can't present. So what do I give the people that aren't done? 0? It's a problem. And so I'm saying I love the idea that I want to do a presentation. And I know people have signed up and said 26 out of the total number of people there, it's not even half the class yet, have said that they want a presentation over an exam, and I'm okay with that. But the challenge is that means everybody but everybody has to be ready to present by that class, and the people that are not are going to get 0 for their exam. But think about it as this is your exam, and you got to talk about it's your journey. What did you make for this little project? What did you learn? It's kind of a lessons learned. It's a bit of, hey, this is what we've presented. You got to demo the little app you made, right, with your team, and you should be pretty proud of it, because that means there's like 4 people working on this thing to make it good. The challenge is that this isn't the only course you have. There's lots of other stuff going on. And, look at today. Today is a good example of assignment 2. Some people haven't started yet, right? It's due tomorrow. I'm laughing, but you know, the challenge is it's kind of sad because I have no choice about it, right? It is what it is. On the good side, that's the good side of a presentation is you're in and out. 7 slides, 10 minutes, and then we do a little bit of feedback, you know, and we get to see people's work, and I think that's good feedback for the class to see, like, this is what everyone built, and what can we learn from each other. I think that's a good thing. The practical exam, the good part about it is you do it on your own. Either you know how to do it or you don't. It's open book, right? You get it done. You build something with MVC, right? It's going to be something that probably requires you to log in, log out, have a secure site. So we're going to be talking about security today. And you can probably build it out, scaffold it out, and build something within 90 to 120 minutes, no problem, and see you later. It's not going to be that bad. The challenge with this is that MVC is a little harder to chew than web forms, right? Web forms is hard, but MVC in some ways, it can present problems. You know, sometimes you can be stuck on trying to get something to work for a little bit of time and testing. You have to rescaffold out your project a couple times, and it can present problems. And if you don't know what you're doing on your own, if you're someone who's been working with other people a lot, you're not going to do great, right? I'm just being honest, right? You know, if you're not someone who works well on your own, if you're not a person who can do that kind of stuff, then you're going to suffer at this point. So I want you guys to vote. That's what I want. I want your vote because I want to know what you want. I want to do what you want, but it's not going to make everybody happy. And here's the other one: a hybrid approach. Some people present, some people do their exam. The problem with that approach is that while you're presenting, someone's doing their exam, right? In the same class. I can't do like, okay, so for the exam, we're going to do it at night, this time frame, and then the morning we're going to do all our presentations. That doesn't work either, because what about if you're not available? What if you're split across different sections? That's another problem for people who are working with other people. You know, there's a lot of little things we have to talk about here. So, you know, the easiest for me would be a practical exam, but the most fun probably would be a presentation, because we'd probably be done a lot earlier, and then, you know, it'd be a good experience for you guys to present. It's good employment skills to develop, to do a presentation. The more often you do it, and it's not like this is the first one you've done, right? The more often you do, the better you get at it, and you become more efficient. I want you to be professional when you do your presentation. So that means no swearing, dress up nice, no hats. You know, I gotta say it, right? You know, wear nice. Think about this is your presentation final exam, and part of it is required. You look nice for that particular day. So that way, imagine I'm the client and you're presenting to the client. How are you going to look in front of everybody? That's the part of the presentation I want you to do. I know some people are going to say, well, Tom, what if I come in shorts? Is that okay? I guess so. But I mean, at the end of the day, it's how you present your strong voice. You know, everyone's got to do their part in the presentation, and that's one thing that people don't like, right? But that's part of it. That's what the presentation is all about. So please vote for this one. I know I've spent enough time on this one, but I want everyone to have their say. I'm going to wait. We still have a few weeks left, right, for this thing to happen. If there's really a clean protest about presentations because of the amount of work that's being done, or if I see over the next couple of weeks that no one's done, right, and everyone's really not able to present, like, it doesn't make any sense. So that's also going to be something of a deciding factor for me when I cast my vote. And you know what, like, you know, I just use God mode a lot, you know, so I just, you know, I want to give you guys choice, but at the end of the day, if I got to pull the trigger, you know, I'll have to do what I have to do, right? So, any comments about this? Any concerns? I want to hear from everybody. I kind of heard from the first class. I want to hear from you guys. What do you feel? What are your thoughts? Cindy's, you know, Cindy, I want to hear from your thoughts because you're the only girl in this section. Tell me. I got to put you on the spot a little bit, and you're being recorded, so I can, you know, for a lifetime, everyone's going to hear you. Hundreds of years later, when I'm gone, huh? What? You want presentation? How about the team in the corner over here? What are we going to do? What do you prefer? Austin, you're good with that? No hat? Okay. No hat, no that. Chris? Thoughts? Thoughts, presentation? Practical? Are you working alone? Are you working alone on your stuff for the final? That's not a great idea. Don't do it, man. Don't do it. Bite the bullet and work with somebody. It's going to make things easier for you, brother. And you know what? It's going to be, you know, find a group. I don't care who it is, and mold with them, right? Like it's just going to make your whole same thing. Are you working alone again? Good. Don't work alone, please. Find someone to work with, combine with the team, and even if it's in this group here, you guys can produce way more if you're working with somebody else, all right? All right, that's it for administration, and we got to talk about this. Next week and the week after, like I said, I will be marking you. I'm still sticking to the plan. One thing I want to do over the next couple of weeks is I want to introduce Web API over the next couple of weeks and talk about AngularJS and how we can incorporate AngularJS as a front end to a MVC backend. How do we do that? Instead of using regular views, how do we do that? How can we use AngularJS for the front end? It's not a bad thing. It's something that is being more and more common these days. So we have a backend with SQL Server, and we're using the backend that can fuel the front end with something like a service or a factory that can kind of produce front end views with Angular. So we'll talk about that. I'd like to try and do Angular 1.5. That would be nice if we can do that, which is more of a component model, closer to Angular 2. Angular 2, not really that ready yet. Still in beta, lots of little workarounds and issues. And I don't want to make it so that it eats us up for the next 3 weeks, because Angular can do that, right? And if it's too tight, depending on how I see things are going next week, we'll see how we change things. But definitely Web API and some testing, I'm going to bring into play over the next couple weeks. Questions about assignment number or the final project? Any questions or concerns around this? So I know there's a lot. What I'm going to do is, like how you see here, each little detail for each part, I'm going to put a little rubric picture underneath here. So when I put this up today, you're going to see that each part is like a little assignment, and this document is going to be just a living document that we're going to be using for the final project. Okay, that's it for this one. Let me just close this one off. Other things to speak about. Close this off too. Yeah, I thought that was going to happen. Let's go to, I want to go to site security. So I put this one up. We're talking about site security this week. And part of what we're going to be discussing today is how we're going to you continue with what we're doing with John Galloway's walkthrough. I'm going to stop debugging for a second and close this off. The problem with John Galloway's walkthrough from his MVC music store, and I'm going to pull this up here, it's using membership, right? We're not using membership here. We're using identity, which is the new version of our security for MVC 5. It's not like we can't do what he's asking us for us to do here, but the thing is, it's already been done for us, right? Like a lot of it's been scaffolded out. So if you look at, changing the password and logging in and registering, all that kind of stuff has all been done through our common, scaffold that we're using, the template. Here's the other thing. He uses something called ASP.NET Website Administration Tool, which works nicely with ASP.NET MVC 3. But as of 2015, Visual Studio 2015, it didn't exist. And actually even in 2013, it was deprecated. So can you do this website administration with an on-site, like a website? They have it in place. So if you're someone who does website administration with this tool, you can do it. It's a quick and dirty tool to kind of things like enable roles for your website, to create roles, like for example, administrator and all that kind of stuff, as well as create users, manage users, talk about access rules, a bunch of stuff for your site that you can do at a high level. And it's outside. It's almost like I feel like when I talk D&D, you ever do metagaming with D&D when you kind of do min-maxing? Ever play a game where you do min-maxing a lot? Huh? That's what this is like. This is like, we're not actually in the website, but we're min-maxing to try and make it so that it's easier for us to, create our websites or create our pages without actually creating any pages, right? So that we've gone away from this model. I know it's kind of a weird analogy when I say D&D, but the problem with this is that, and that's why we've deprecated this approach, is a lot of times we can scaffold out our model for our users and roles, and that might be the better approach than to do this, right? So can you do this? Yes, you can, absolutely. If you want to, if you can set up a small IIS server on the right port, and if you actually Google it, there is the right port to set up on IIS. You have to go to C:\Windows IIS and kick it off. I think it's under Program Files. IIS, and it'll work, right? Through your command prompt. And there's a bunch of other switches you got to put in play to kick off your IIS server, like locally on the machine. And then from there, after you've got your IIS server running, you have to put in the right path and the right port on your browser, and then it'll take you to something that looks almost identical to this, but that points specifically at your application. But the challenge is, and I've been working with this over the last few days, is as soon as you create the roles, it doesn't get scaffolded to the right database. Let me show you what I'm talking about. So we're going to do it a little bit manually today. So if I go File, New, Project, and we're going to do a new project today. I'm just going to call it Web Application 3, because you're Section 3, and I'm going to put it in the same folder, COMP2007. I'm going to click OK for this one. So I'm going to accept the Web Application.NET Framework and press OK. Normally what we do is we choose, from an authentication model, we choose no authentication, like for example for assignment 2, or individual user accounts. The other ones, work and school accounts, use AD, Active Directory, and you can choose one that you're signed onto if you're using a cloud service like Azure, or on-premises server that's here, let's say at the school for Georgian, like let's say a Georgian College Active Directory server, or something that's in your company. Then you can choose work and school accounts. Windows authentication is used for intranet sites that don't require authentication largely. Like as an example, for people logging in, as long as you're logged into the system, like let's say for example you log into the wireless and you're able to get on the network, you're good to go. That's your authentication. Again, typically for information-based sites, nothing that's going to change things on the back end or so on. But what we want to focus on today is individual user accounts, and we'll press OK like normal. We're not going to add unit tests today. We're just going to press OK. This is going to scaffold stuff, and I want to talk about the stuff that to relate back to the assignment, right? So assignment 2 and project 2, right? Project 2, or the final project, you're going to have a bunch of stuff that gets scaffolded out. And let's take a look at some of these views, right? When you get security views scaffolded, you get a couple of controllers, few controllers, and some models that get automatically generated for you. So the identity model and the account view model, those two models get scaffolded out for your security, right? As well as the manage view models, right? So all of these three things, all these models are all scaffolded out for security requirements, right? Okay, then we have, and I'm going to go back to this. If I click on account view models for a second, again, this talks of your external logins, verified code view model, and so on, a bunch of different things that are part of this model. And you can see that there are requirements that are here in terms of the way the model is scaffolding out their views. That's what this thing does, right? So again, example would be, this is relating to the views or the database that's going to be generated for us. So that's why these models are here. So this is, again, a code-first approach to database generation. Right now, if I look at the app data folder, there's nothing, right? There is nothing in app data. That's where our database is going to be created, and because of where our web config file is pointing to from not this one. There's two web config files. This one, from a web config file perspective, if you look at the default connection is pointing to a database that's going to be existing inside of our app data directory, which is local, and is called something after the creation of our web application. Example, web application 3, 2016 is the year, 07 is the month, 28 is the day, and then the time, right? That we're kind of creating it. 0533 or 31 is when I created this thing. Okay. Let's go back. So that's what this web config does. It creates an app data, a database here, and it does that, based on the, the name of the file. So what we use is these models to scaffold out the database based on these requirements. When I have a required attribute in part of my model, it means that it can be only non-null. It cannot be null. All right, for this one. And you can see that everything from reset pass-through view model to the register view model to the login view model, where my display name is email. For the email address, that's what we're going to be using for, as an example, the username and the password, and also this whole idea of remember me. This stuff is all required. Notice that there is not a ID for your login view model. right? Because we're using the ID that's connected to the email address. The registration model is going to show you this as well, because this is all part of the account view model. Here's the register view model. The register view model has, again, email and password and confirmed password, but notice that there is no ID, right? The ID is not automatically generated, as an example, like how it's auto-incremented. It's not like that. The ID is hashed, and we're going to get a hashed ID for our username and so on, the relation between our username and our password, right? That's a different thing, and the reason for that is because from a security perspective, imagine if I had my ID and it was a numeric, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, then I can guess, well, your ID is number 6, right? So I can try and hack in and get the data from your ID. This way, you cannot guess what the ID is. And furthermore, a lot of times what people do is they also hash their usernames as well. So you can't even tell who that user is, anything. And that's a higher security model. We're not going to do that here. But that's, if you notice, when we have our login view and our registration view, it's very similar in terms of the kind of messages you get and everything else. But notice all these attributes are going to be the way that all of our forms are going to be scaffolded, right? So this is, like I said before, the validation happens on the model side of the house. So we're going to create another model for us to choose to use security with today. All right, so that's the first thing, the account view model. The other one is the identity model. So identity model, again, it talks about our application DB context. Application DB context is almost like the connection string that we're going to be used to connect to the database, right? But it also creates the same kind of context model for user identity, right? So I want to find out who the user is, as an example, and I can get the user identity based on the application DB context, right? That's all this speaks to. So identity model is the main one we're using. The managed view models, this talks about things like when it comes to managing current logins, who's logged in, as an example, how can I set my password, for things. And some of the managed view models are scaffolding out some pages that we're not going to need. And I'll talk about that. For example, the change password view model is something that we're going to need, right? For example, here's my current password, here's my new password, right? And it has some requirements here. Confirm my new password, I can put them in the same time, and they have to match, right? So those are the things that that happen on the back end from a model perspective. But there's going to be some, like this one, add phone number view model, verify phone number view model. You may think that this is something part of our profile, but actually it's doing phone number verification. And we can't be doing that right now. Why? Because you need to pay for an SMS service or something like that. Unless you want to pay for an SMS service, I don't recommend it, right? So there's going to be some things we need to take out, and that's why I'm talking about these things. So let's see the pages. If I run this thing, and we've seen this before, I'm just going into a little bit more detail from a security perspective, right? Not much. And a lot of it's going to be the same from web forms. I know people said to me this morning that, hey, Tom, I know we kind of touched upon this on web forms. Yeah, you did, but there's some new stuff we have to also talk about as well. Not a lot of complicated things today, but some things. So if I go and log in and register, let's just log in for the first time, and notice that I don't have a login ID, so if I try, it's going to reject me. So I can go into register as a new user, right? Again, these pages you would not have to scaffold for your assignment 2 or your final project, because, I mean, I want you to style them. They should be styled for your own, to match your pages, colors, and all that stuff, but you don't have to wireframe them. I mean, it's just log in and register pages, and it's not like it's going to look a little bit differently than what we've seen before. So let's say I choose admin at example.com, right, as an example, and then my password, it's got to be complex because it's going to ask for certain password requirements. We're going to change that later on. So I'm going to go into put in my password. I'm going to use Georgian, if I can type it, 2016 exclamation mark. I'm pretty sure I'm going to type this wrong, but let's see what happens. Hey, I can't believe it. All right, so I logged in as my admin, and now that I'm logged in, I can also do things like I want to manage, right? So if I want to manage the pages, and I've shown you this before, I can go to the manage pages. Now I'm going to see something that makes no sense for me. I need to get rid of this page. Why? Because it doesn't do anything other than take me to my change your password page, but I'd rather have a link to get me there right away, right? I should be able to change my password. That makes sense. This page makes sense for me to keep, but the rest of them, like this one, is only managing external providers. If you're going to have an external provider, maybe this page is okay, right? But external provider means that you got to register as a developer with someone like a Facebook, Twitter, Microsoft, Google+, GitHub, whatever it is, and then get an app ID and an app secret to basically configure your site, which comes out of the box, ready to go, with OAuth, using a third-party provider. We're going to talk about to register the user there, and we're going to create a trust relationship with that third party for them to log in, for that person to log in. We'll talk about that a little bit. I'm guaranteeing you, for the most part, most of you will not do this piece. So take it out. In fact, if you don't need it, the rule is going to be from now on for the rest of the semester, take it out. Please don't give me pages that are useless, that don't go anywhere. We're going to be talking about creating a nice 404 page over the next couple of weeks. I'd rather see your nice, beautiful 404 page than something that doesn't make any sense, it doesn't work, or is half-baked, right? So this got to go. Same thing for anything else in a page that doesn't make any sense. Like here, let me go back, and if I try and let's register another user in a second. I'm going to register somebody else in the class. But for now, you can see that the basic pages of home, about, and contact, those pages you're going to have to style a little bit. Contact page, obviously, you're going to put kind of information about the contact. Please don't give me these pages back like this. Okay, pages getting back like this means mark loss, right? For me, it doesn't mean just because you scaffolded it out. This is just stand-ins. I do not want these pages, and I've had them in the past. Assignment 1 is a good example, right? I get pages that are completely blank, right? I don't understand. So please don't do that. Okay, again, homepage. Let's go back to the other pages that you get. You might think that some of these pages are really cool, like, for example, add phone number. But like I said, add phone number is not what you think. So again, under the Manage controller, I'm going to go and say add phone number. I'll go add phone number. But what add phone number does, if I could do it, is not add the phone number to my profile, but actually tries to verify my number. Right? And again, you need some SMS service to do that for you. Take it out. This doesn't make any sense. And if you go through each of these pages, I'm not going to go through painfully through each of these pages like I did earlier today, but I'd like you to go through these pages, and if these pages don't make any sense to you, just take them out so that you can't get to them, right? There is no page to go to if it doesn't exist, right? Just, we'll serve them up a 404 page that basically says, no, thank you, you've reached the wrong page, or, maybe you meant to go here, redirect them back to the home page, something else. Okay, so some pages that we're going to get, even in our account pages, like for example, forgot password. You might think that you can put in your password and forgot password. Not going to work, right? Like you might think it works, right? So here, I'm going to just choose forgot password or forgot password confirmation, right? So I'm going to go to my forgot password. Let's see if it works. So I'm going to go back. What I'm saying, when I say it doesn't work, it doesn't mean that it doesn't work. Here, let me just revamp this thing. I meant that when you go to forgot password, what happens is under the account, you give them your email. Okay, what does that mean? It's going to send you an email message, right, to verify that your password, you're going to give you a chance to change your password, right? Okay, or send you a link to log in again to change your password. That means you need to have an email service set up, right? So that means you have to set up SendGrid, which by the way is free for students with Azure now. You can do that. But that's not part of my requirement. If you want to do that for bonus points, and I will have a section for bonus sections if you want to do stuff, go ahead, right? But I'm not going to require it of you. So if you don't need it, take it out. That's the message, okay? So scaffold's nice, but it includes stuff that it is not required for us. Let's talk a little bit about security again. From a PowerPoint perspective, we have some stuff about security. I think the main things we have to think about is identity really talks about, just as a refresher from first half of the semester, identity is like, hey, who are you, right? Again, use this as a reference card. Authentication is how can you prove who you are? Username and password, or in our case, email address and password. And we use email addresses more often nowadays because email addresses are pretty much unique, right? You're not going to share the email address with somebody else, right? The challenge is when we do use email addresses, we need to verify the email, or else it's just as bad as a username, right? So usually you combine those two things together. So one of the bonuses for sure on this assignment will be get SendGrid working, so you can verify your email address, right? And so we need to have that email verification. We'll talk about it in a bit. Now, authorization is different than authentication. Again, this is just a refresher, right? Authorization is what can you do? So you're logged in, but what are you allowed to do? Are you an administrator? Are you a widget manager? What are you doing? What is your role, right? And depending on what your role is or who you are, right, you can access certain resources or not, right? That's authorization. That's different than authentication. Those are two that, unfortunately, they're called the same. They start with the same auth, A-U-T-H, so we kind of confuse the two sometimes. When I go through and when we talk about ASP.NET, what you start off with, a lot of the configuration starts off in your app start folder. So if I go to your app start folder, back in here, you can see that I start with a couple things. The first one is this startup.auth. I'm just going to close these down for a second. Startup.auth.cs. Let's take a look at this for a second. So we have this configure authorization and authentication. And what this does is it basically it has three different classes that are triggered in this model. One, and that's through the Owen model itself, right? So one of them is application DB context. We talked about that. That creates your connection, right? That's the first thing. The second method or the second class handles your user itself. The username, password, all that kind of stuff, handles token authentication, blah, blah, blah. And the last one, your sign-in manager, checks to see if they're signed in or not. What's the state of your sign-in? So those are the three things that that are being used. Further down, you notice that we use cookie authentication or token-based authentication. So you get a cookie, and instead of you having, every time you check back with the server, what ends up happening is it says, I'm logged in. Now I can access whatever I have access to. When you want to redirect, just like we did with our startup.cs, you're going to see that there's an area here that says account login is where you go when you can't log in. Again, just like in web forms, you can modify this to make it whatever you want. Time spent from a validation perspective, how long it takes to validate, 30 minutes, right? So if you choose to validate yourself using email or some other form of validation, you have 30 minutes to validate yourself before it stops working. Right? It's not a very long time. These are all things that you can do. Two-factor authentication is already built in. You just have to enable things, and if you notice, there's a lot of comments here about how do you enable two-factor authentication. The last piece here of all this all commented section tells you the structure of how you can set up things like OAuth for Microsoft services, Twitter, Facebook, Google for the basics, and you can include others like GitHub. Like I said, GitHub might be a good one, or others, whatever you choose to use. All right, so these are the ones. Now, as you can see, they're not enabled. Do you want to enable them? Go ahead. That's going to be bonus marks, but it's not required for what I'm asking you to do, right? That's your startup auth. The other pieces are, and I've just talked about all this, first class, second class, and third class that you're using to log in. The other pieces are what happens when you do log in, your state when you log in. I'm going to make this a little bigger if I can. So what happens is you go through these different state changes. It's a success. You've logged in. You're locked out. You've tried to log in a bunch of times with the wrong username, password combination, whatever. You're locked out. You require verification. You need to validate who you are because you're using two-factor authentication or something else, right? Or simply failure. You failed to log in. So one of those states is what ends up happening as it comes back. And depending on what this does, the system reacts a little differently to all these different states. Imagine if we had to scaffold this out all on our own. So we had to build all those classes, just like we did actually for when we used the mean stack and Node. We did a lot of this stuff on our own. And we used things like Passport and Mongoose to do all that. But a lot of this stuff wasn't done for us. We had to do it for ourselves. Okay. Just going to continue here. So all this stuff is happening in this file, this startup auth file. I'm going to keep going here because I don't want to read all this. One thing is, when we set up a trust relationship with a third provider, and I want to talk about this for a second. Let's say, for example, and this is the stuff that's commented out, I want to set up a trust relationship. It's like, okay, I have a trust relationship with Dan, right? Dan trusts me because we know each other. I don't know Cindy, but Dan knows Cindy, right? So therefore, Cindy's my friend too, right? Wrong. It doesn't make any sense, right? But what happens is is exactly this. So I know GitHub, you know, as an example, I'm the provider, I'm the application. GitHub knows Cindy, therefore Cindy can log into my site. That's how it works. We actually create a three-way trust relationship when we use OAuth, and it kind of looks like this, right? So it's like, okay, so the user goes to the web application redirects the user, right? Where does it redirect them to? The external provider login. The user logs in, the provider returns a cookie, a token basically, comes back and gets forwarded to the web application, which responds with the proper website when the person is logged in. So a three-way trust relationship. And again, I was thinking about this earlier. It's almost like that. There's a book that my son reads a lot, and I want to this one. It'll remind you when you see it. It's called Pirate, Viking, and Scientist. Okay, I like to look at these things, right? Pirate, Viking, and Scientist. There we go. Images. Pirate, Viking, and Scientist. There's the image. So the way it goes like this. It goes pirate is friends with scientist, and scientist is friends with Viking, but Viking and pirate are not friends, right? And the reason for this is because, and I'm bringing this up, is because basically just because you have a relationship with you know, the provider doesn't mean that you and the other person are friends. It just means you've created a three-way trust relationship. Because the other provider trusts them and you trust the provider, you're letting that person log in and register on your site. Why would you want to do that? And why wouldn't it be better if you held all the credentials locally? And there's a kind of a controversy around that. One of it is that, you know, it's better for you to have the provider, which is usually bigger, provide the security as opposed to you doing it and your little mom and pop server. Why? Because I probably can get your server hacked a lot faster than, you know, you're going to hack Twitter, Facebook, or Microsoft, right? It just, you know, from a secure perspective. The other thing is liability, right? I would rather have Microsoft be liable for their you know, credentials. Same thing when it comes to credit card authentication and all that kind of stuff. I'd rather have PayPal take care of that, you know, financial tracking and everything else and payments. I don't want to take care of that. Let them take care of it. I'll pay them the percentage and they can do it. I don't want to do it on my site, because I got to keep track of Visa cards. I got to keep track of all that kind of stuff. I'd rather have another institution take care of that, that's ultra secure, that's not going to lose their information, and has nothing to do with me, right? Some people have that, especially for smaller mom and pops kind of, you know, small to medium-sized businesses, what I really should say, that kind of stuff. When you're building websites for them, a lot of times it's better to farm out that functionality to somebody else and use OAuth. Okay, we're talking security. This isn't a security course, but really you got to follow a few best practices at least. Okay, let's continue. I want to talk about configuration a little bit before we break, and we're going a little faster again as normal compared to the first class, which is okay. One thing to note is the identity system itself and what we get. One thing is the user itself. The user has a bunch of different properties. We don't use them all right now. From a startup perspective, we use email, that's for sure. Email confirm means that, again, I have to have an email confirmation service, some kind of email that goes out and back. And that's very common these days, which we're going to talk about in a second. But from a default perspective, it's not set up. It's set up but not activated, right? We're gonna add additional configuration details for that to happen. Even our locked out enabled says true, but the reality is we won't get locked out until we set that relationship up. You won't be able to lock out anybody. If you try, even if you try and log in a bunch of times, it won't lock you out, right? Let's continue. Other things, for example, like your password hash, you know, the salted hash form of the user password. That's really important to hold in memory. We're going to talk about that. And if I was to actually look at this, and we've seen this before, again, I'm going to look at SQL Server Object Explorer. And if you look here, usually you have some local DBs, right? So if I was to look at these two things as an example, and if I was to refresh, and if I was going to kind of go through here and take a look at the databases, you can see that my database for this application is called Web Application 3, 2016, 07, 28, you know, at 531 or whatever it was that we, or 5. Let me take a look at this. And if I open up the tables, you can see that there are several default tables that have been created. If I look at the app users, ASP.NET user table, and if I go to view data, I should be able to see the data for my username. So here's the hash of the ID. Again, it's not auto-incrementing. We just create a hash, a different hash, a unique number that's going to represent the ID. The email, if the email is confirmed and so on, the password hash for that represents the password. Password's pretty big. Security stamps and so on. And there's a bunch of stuff that's empty. And the reason for it is because it's not configured, right? One thing to note is the username and the email is exactly the same in this particular scenario because we've made our email and username the same, okay? Do we have to do this? No, we don't. Can we go use username and password instead? If you really want to, you can. But again, what it's shown is that email is a little bit more secure and more people are using that as their username. So that's what's being stored here on the server. And notice that I've logged in, right? Or sorry, that I've registered myself as admin at example.com. All right, so this is all the stuff that are part of the, again, the user model itself. I want to, I guess, skip through here for a second. And I want to talk about other things that we can do that we get out of the box. Two-factor authentication. I want to tell you a story about this one. And again, it's about security. Who uses two-factor authentication to log into their bank accounts? Just saying. Anybody? Well, if you don't, you should, right? A good example of this is, I'm not going to mention it, but my wife works at a bank, right? And she has friends that work at different banks, different institutions. And, you know, quite often they get, you know, these emails that come to the institution that say, hi, it's from Cindy, right? And it's going to a, you know, a credit manager or an account manager. His name is Dan, right? And Dan, thank you so much. Can you move 10,000 which we call Canadian from my Canadian account to my US account in the Cayman Islands, right? It looks exactly, thank you so much. Even the way the email is written, it looks exactly like the email that's being written that you know, Cindy normally writes to Dan. It looks identical to Cindy's email, in fact. The way she writes her email, her signature, the whole thing, it looks like her, right? Dan scratches his head and says, that's a weird request. So what is he supposed to do? This is required by the banks. Call Cindy, right? And say, Cindy, hi, just to confirm, you want to send 10,000 from your Canadian account to your, you know, your US account in the Caymans? And she's going to say, well, what are you talking about? It happens every day, every single day at all the institutions. You got to think about this. Email gets hacked all the time, right? And that's being done because of accessing your information. Where you have an authentication app and you go up, and when you log into your bank account, there's an authentication app that says, here's some of your details. You use two-factor authentication to log into online banking, and then you're good. So even if they have your username and password credentials, who cares? They cannot still log in because they need that second factor of authentication to log in. Highly recommend. I know it's a pain in the ass to use two-factor authentication, but we do it all the time. When we go to an ATM, you know, like you know, to get money, we put our card in there. This is a good example here, and then we have our physical card plus our code. Those two things, that's two-factor authentication to get your money out, right? Someone steals your card, they need the code, right? Although they can probably muscle it. If you've got the card, they can always beat you up to get the code, right? I would give it to them, right? If someone's gonna pull some kind of weapon on me, I'd give them whatever they want. Take whatever money you like, man, as long as they live, right? But the idea here is it protects you one more step. We're talking about best practices. I'm gonna skip to this one. The other one is, of course, so we talk email confirmation and two-factor authentication. Those are the two major ones. And we're going to talk about how we can protect our websites with the authorize attribute in a second. Okay. I'm going to skip through this whole part. This is just, again, a reference card to talk about this. This is really cool. One of the things that you know, we always complain, and I had some people ask me the question, I want to soften up my you know, login rules. I know that, you know, we're supposed to do 6 digits or 10 digits. Actually, it's supposed to be 10 digits now, right? With uppercase and lowercase characters as opposed, and one non-numeric digit or non-alphanumeric or whatever, like a exclamation mark or something. Can I soften this up for testing? Is there a way to do it? Where do I look? There is a way, and the place you look is here. If you look at Solution Explorer, and if you go to your identity config, And if you scroll down, you'll see that there is a section that talks exactly about this, right? So here it is. So an example is my required length is 6. I can make it 10 if I want to make it tougher. Or I can turn these off. Let's turn them off. So I want to say something like required non-letter or digit. I want to make it false. I want to require digit. I'm going to make that false. It's not required. Required lowercase. Turn that off too. The more of these I turn down, the lower grade my security. I can put whatever word or combination 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 as an example. I can do that. Same thing with user lockout enabled by default. I can turn that off. So there's no user lockout. I can keep trying and banging on the server's door until I get in. Right? That's what this protects us against, right? So I can turn all this off, and if I do that, and it's okay for testing if you're going to test it and do this, but then, guys, in a real world scenario, turn it back on and make this 10, okay? But here's the thing, okay? It all comes down to security versus usability, right? Increase security to the point where it's really hard to log in and people are going to leave your site, right? Example, Amazon. We're going to talk about some providers in a second when we go back to that. Amazon is one of the the biggest retailers in the world. I would say the biggest retailers in the world, but they don't make you use upper and lowercase digits and all that kind of stuff. They tell you it's a weak password. They tell you that because they don't want you to run away. They want you to buy their products, right? And you know what? The onus is on you to be secure. If you don't want to make it secure, it's up to you. They told you, they warned you, but it's up to you if you want to go in there and with a password that's weak, right? So that's the thing. You have to kind of balance between ultra secure and then usability, right? We talked about that before, and I'm kind of doing that here. So let's try and log in. So I'm going to kind of save that, and I'm going to hit log in, and I'm going to register Dan. I'm going to register Dan as a user, right? Because he's going to be my scapegoat today. I'm going to use him for everything, right? It's because he's right in front of me. Let's try this out. So I kind of come into the site, and I've changed my security settings, and I'm going to go and log off as admin. I'm going to register a new user, and let's register Dan at example.com. Again, you'd have to verify that, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, right? We can do that. So 6 characters, register, done, right? So can you do it for testing? Absolutely, and I recommend you do it to speed things up, because otherwise putting in a secure password and all that kind of stuff can slow you down a little bit. And it's there by default. So that's what Microsoft does for you, so to help you out. But from a testing perspective, if you know where to look, you can turn those off for now, and then we can go back and turn it back on later. Just don't forget. Okay, so we've got Dan registered and everything else, right? So I talked about Amazon and security, and what I want to do is after the break, I'm going to take a short break. But after the break, what I'd like to do is talk a little bit more about retailers, how they set up their pages, the paging, the styling, and all that stuff. A little bit off topic about security. I want to go back to, kind of cut it up a little bit and talk about the project number 2 a little bit more. But only because there's some stuff you're going to have to develop. If you're a person who's using your restaurant site as a kickoff point, how do I want those pages styled? And if you're a person who is going to develop some kind of store, like you're going to sell something, how do I want those pages to be styled? It's going to be slightly different. So we're going to talk about after the break. So right now, just to recap, is we've talked about things like how do I change some settings in order for us to when we scaffold out a brand new application. And this is what I want you to do for your final project. Get rid of some of these things, change your identity configuration to work with your stuff. And we're going to talk about some other sections as well. So let's take a short break. This kind of talks about, for the first hour, this talks about your assignment, your final project, and a little bit about security. The philosophy stuff is done. Now we're going to get into actually doing something with it. And when we come back in 10 or 15 minutes, we'll talk a little bit more about what I'm looking for your final project.